Today on Juneteenth, a day that reminds us of the long and unfinished journey toward freedom and equality, I'm honored to be joined by someone who is quite literally in the fight to move that journey forward. Lee Johnson is a Democrat running to unseat Lindsey Graham and bring real representation back to the people of South Carolina. He's not just running against something, he's running for something: dignity, justice, and a future where every voice matters. This isn't just about flipping a Senate seat, although that's important too. It's about flipping the script on who gets to lead, who gets heard, and what kind of country we want to be. And there's no better day to have this conversation than Juneteenth. Lee, welcome, and thank you for stepping into the arena. How's it going today?
Good. How are you, Adam? I'm doing great.
Good. No, thank you so much for stepping up. I really appreciate it. And, this is one of those where I think a lot of us can't even believe 6 years has already gone by. But if there's ever a time, in our history, it feels like, for the last 20 years, we've been talking about this is the election of all elections. This is the election that's going to decide whether there's elections again and so forth. I know there's a lot of people that are really concerned whether or not there will be midterm elections. But the fact that you have stepped up to take on this fight, especially in a seat where a lot of people forget 6 years ago, quite literally, we were in the middle of a pandemic. And, Democrats actually have to go door to door and get out the vote, unlike Republicans who oftentimes their voters just come out and vote. And I know you're building a big tent where we're reaching across the aisle and we're going to have independents and Republicans coming into this. But this will be a different campaign where you're able to do that. And it means the world to me and many others that you're stepping up. I'd like to kick this off with taking a quick look at your first ad, if that works for you.
Sounds great.
Okay, let's jump into it.
Thank you for joining us. Markets plummeted Monday as investors expressed fear of an economic slowdown.
A global trade war could impact billions of dollars in South Carolina.
With tariffs now in effect, prices are going up.
Lindsey Graham has been a Washington politician for over 3 decades, and he's leading the charge to gut Social Security and Medicaid.
We made promises we can't keep: Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid.
And now he backs the chaotic tariffs that are raising prices and cutting paychecks across South Carolina.
The tariff front makes sense to me.
Lindsey Graham hasn't had the decency to hold a public town hall in over 8 years. No accountability, no answers.
I don't need a town hall to know what to do.
He's not listening.
He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot.
And we're stuck paying the price.
I don't think he's a xenophobic, race-baiting, religious bigot.
I'm Lee Johnson. I'm an engineer, a businessman, and most importantly, a dad. And I'm running for the United States Senate. I wasn't born into politics. I was born in a construction family, operating heavy equipment before I could drive. My family taught me how to build things: roads, bridges, jobs. And I've carried that with me everywhere, from construction sites and factory floors to boardrooms. I believe America is still a land of opportunity and that our best days are ahead of us. We can build a better future through innovation, but that takes new leaders. We know Washington is broken, but we keep sending the same politicians back, expecting something to change. Lindsey Graham built a career for himself. I've spent my life building for others, finding innovative solutions. And in Washington, I'll protect Social Security and Medicare. I'll work to bring down grocery prices and prescription drug costs. And I'll fight to make your health care more affordable. And I'll work to ban members of Congress from trading stock. Because public service shouldn't be for profit. I'm not here for a political career, so if you elect me, I promise to serve no more than 2 terms. So today, I'm hitting the road to listen, to learn, and to earn your vote. Because the best ideas don't come from Washington, they come from you. It's time for new leadership. No more gridlock, just real solutions. If you're tired of the noise, I'm asking for your help. And together, we can build a better future for all of South Carolina. So visit LeeJohnsonForSC.com and join our campaign. And together, we can retire Lindsey Graham. I'm Lee Johnson, and I approve this message.
We may have a lot of dogs barking. I think they like your ad. Moose and Simba are running around here. I thought that was a really powerful ad. A lot of times Democrats try to, they almost feel forced by others to kind of get something into this sort of bumper, sticker slogan or 60 seconds so that Twitter automatically replays it. But I like the idea that you went longer to really get your message out. You made this commitment for 2 terms, which is sort of, unheard of from when folks are running for office. But I thought it was a really strong ad.
Yeah. We just wanted to come out swinging. There's kind of this balance we have to play. We need to be fighters on one hand. We also need to have civility and respect. So I'm just hearing that across the board. Someone to fight, but again, at the end of the day, we need to unite as a country. There's a lot of problems coming down the pike, a lot of issues that we face with our new generation, and it's going to require a new, innovative, younger generation, generational leadership in Washington. There's no doubt about it.
I think that is 100% accurate. Also, just so you know, it flickered, but we just had major thunder. That's why the dogs are going crazy. So let's start with your why. What made you decide that now was the moment to run for U.S. Senate in South Carolina? And what's at stake if we don't flip this seat, in your opinion?
Yeah, so a lot to unpack there. So there's a lot of reasons, really. But I think what I'm seeing is that I'm seeing that a whole new generation of Americans are being left behind. I'm seeing the American dream die. And, I'm worried about my children's future. I have a younger girl. She just graduated from kindergarten. She's going into first grade. And in 12 years, she's going to be an adult. And I wonder, what the world's going to be like, when she is an adult. And I've also got 3 older children. And I'm, having conversations with them about, starting families, about potentially buying homes, which, they can't do right now because it's just out of reach for them. And in fact, my oldest daughter, she got laid off from her job just a year out of college because of the Trump tariff, simply because her, management just didn't have visibility into the business because of the tariffs, because they're not only bad from a percentage perspective, but they're bad because they're on, off. Well, you just can't run a business like that, and you can't run industries and supply chains having that whiplash back and forth. So, and when I get on the campaign trail, it's not only my family. These are the types of challenges that families across South Carolina and across the entire country are facing. We're talking about, can we put food on the table? Can we have, can we get our medicine? Can we have, is education even possible, these days with the prices that we're seeing in education? And there's just so many things out of sync, out of grasp for so many people. And, I just kind of chuckled when you played that video of my advertisement. Lindsey talked about, supporting the tariffs, and he thinks it's a great idea. Well, I would love to be on the debate stage with him and say, "Hey, Lindsey, do you think those tariffs are still a good idea? Because look at all the problems, that's causing throughout the country." And the world's just, if we become an island unto ourselves, well, you know what? The rest of the world's just going to build, supply chains and trading routes around us. So, that's just kind of a crazy, fallacy. It's just economics 101. It's just amazing that our country's leaders don't even know the basics about economy. It just makes me laugh. So, just from a cultural perspective, Adam, I would say that Lindsey is someone who brings gasoline to a fire. We've got plenty of those guys, and these are the guys that have gotten us in trouble. We need people who can put, water on the fire, that can put out the fire. And, until we get voters out there to vote for those people that bring the water and bring the innovation and the solutions, we're just going to be in the same old downward spiral. But it all starts out with, good leadership, competent leadership, ethical leadership, strong leadership. And, that's why I'm stepping up.
Folks are listening to this. You might hear some dogs barking, lots of thunder. It's, I don't know if that's a coincidence as we're talking about Lindsey Graham. But
we're bringing it. We're bringing it.
Yeah, exactly. And I spent a long time working for Hillary Clinton, and what's interesting to me is in 2003, when I first went to work for her, she was somebody who spent a lot of time doing Bible study, like regularly with Lindsey Graham and John McCain and others, and for me to see his evolution over the last 2 decades has been really something. And it seems like there's a lot more to it, but I can understand at one point why South Carolinians may have, supported Lindsey Graham, but to see how much he's changed over time and just how far to the right, as opposed to someone who talks about what you're talking about with, with children, that resonates a lot with me. As I have a 16-year-old and I have a 2-year-old, and these are all things we think about all the time. He's just so out of touch with reality. And we talk a lot about, Trumpism and whether it's here to stay or if it's here to stay for good. But, the idea that he was able to come out and just be so far against this president and then immediately just fall in line, I really think, speaks for itself. There's not much more to be said, but it just really speaks for itself in terms of sort of the Lindsey Graham that you're running against today, who may have been a very different candidate 2 decades ago. So on that, a lot of South Carolinians, especially young people and voters of color, feel ignored by national politics. What would you say to someone who's never voted or who's given up hope that their voice matters?
Yeah, I would tell them that it is their voice as guaranteed through the Constitution and Declaration of Independence that guarantees their future. So if it really is a true fact that if you do want to create the future and you do want a better world, you need to get out to vote. I mean, there's just no other way of getting around it. And so I would just mention that the hard fact that voting is important. That's how we create our future. That's how we create the world we want, the country we want. And it's really, I think, part of my campaign's strategy. It's really part of our ethic to get out and talk to as many people as possible and to remind them that there is hope and there is hope through their vote. And, really part of our strategy is to get out and empower people and say that their voice matters. We know that there's been a whole generation left behind of, young people, especially young Hispanics, young African Americans. And we've seen how a lot of these groups have been moving over to the Republicans. And a lot of the research that I've been reading and a lot of people that I talk to basically is this idea that people just haven't been out and getting in front of them and talking with them. We need to make sure we get in front of them, we talk to them, we tell them that we care for them, that we truly want them to succeed. We want them to have the American dream and, build a career, build a family, get that big truck if you want. And just make it clear that the American dream is accessible to all people. It doesn't matter where you're from, who you are, what race you are, what religion you are. The American dream belongs to everyone. And I think we need to just remind people of that. It's really in our vote, in the power of our vote, that we change the world. And this is something that we're really taking seriously on the campaign.
Yeah, I love what you talked about in terms of young voters as well. When I first met Bill Clinton back in 1997, one thing that he said to me that always sort of stuck with me is not just winning elections, but he said, winning elections and also the importance of bringing our country together is about addition, not subtraction. And so many people are quick to write folks off and focus on what's best for them and their family as opposed to what's best for what makes this country so great. And I think, in terms of the way that you talked about young voters, it's not only critically important, but especially in a state like South Carolina, which is often written off by national Democrats. So what do folks outside the state get wrong about the people there? And what kind of investment does it take to compete and win in a state like South Carolina?
Yeah, that's a good question. Something we're spending a lot of time talking about. I think one thing that they get wrong is that, for example, let's just take a look at Lindsey's approval rating in the state. It's a dismal 34%. I think I mentioned earlier in today's discussion that he's more vulnerable than ever. So when it comes to getting out, I see a lot of people. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of excitement. In fact, I was just knocking on doors for one of our candidates that just won a special election by a landslide. We're talking 40 points, Keyshawn Scott. And he is representing 3 counties in rural South Carolina. And what we really saw there is Democrats getting out to vote. They are realizing that they need to take the future into their own hands. And we just saw that in a real, race, a special election here in South Carolina. So I think, 26 is going to be a great year for the Democrats if we can mobilize the vote. I'm seeing meetings that are doubling, tripling, quadrupling, as opposed to before the election. That's the feedback I'm getting from a lot of leaders around the state, a lot of county leaders, for example. And so there's a lot of energy out there. And I think that we are in a different time period. You can't say that 2025 is the same as 2019 and so on. We are literally in a different part of history where I think people are finally starting to wake up, saying if we don't take action now, we may not have future elections.
Yeah, I think that all of those points that you made are so important, and a couple of things that sort of stick out are one, oftentimes when someone steps up and does what you're doing, a lot of people are quick to say like, oh, we need to put resources elsewhere. Like this is just not winnable. And a couple races that I've been involved in were similar to that, except like we came very close or we won. Like no one thought that Joe Biden was going to carry Georgia, by 11,000 and a handful of votes. I worked on the Lauren Boebert race that came down to a couple hundred votes, and throughout that entire campaign, everybody was asking folks not to support her opponent because it just was not winnable, to the point where not only did she barely win, she ended up, having to switch districts in the end. So I think that we not only can we not write anything off, but I think that we are at a point in history right now where things are just so different. And, for instance, for me, my father worked in the intelligence community for 30 years, and to see so much of what so many people like him did for their entire career to be almost being undone overnight, depending on, what we're talking about or where it is. And these could be social issues. It could be, the progress that was made in Ukraine and other places like that. We really need to step up and support people like you. And for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, there's a Democrat there, Sean Harris, who at the end of the day, I think it was the New York Times pointed this out. There were two congressional districts that just way outperformed the presidential ticket. And one of those was in Georgia with Sean Harris, where he ran 8 points ahead of Kamala Harris. And so a lot of people forget, even in these congressional districts, same thing in South Carolina, it's so important that Democrats step up. We don't know what's going to happen at the end of the day, but in these congressional districts, we're going to bring out votes for a statewide candidate like yourself. So again, I just want to put that out there for folks that are watching, because you just can't write these off. But Lindsey Graham, I think, has really exposed himself in so many different ways that if there was ever a time and the right candidates now. One thing I wanted to ask you about, and it could be a single issue or it could be a lot of things, but, what are you hearing, as it relates to issues on the ground that people in South Carolina most care about or are worried about or are talking about?
Yeah, the most important thing that I'm hearing from people is just, common kitchen table issues, things like, job security, am I going to have a job next day or next week or next month? And, am I going to be able to make ends meet? Am I going to be able to put food on the table? What am I going to do, with education, or can I afford healthcare? We actually, in our own family, we had a situation where we had one of the medications, go up by 1,000%, out of the blue. And we're as a country, we are the most powerful country in the history of the world. Yet we see ourselves and our neighbors suffering so much. And how do we reconcile that? Where's the morality in that? Where's the ethics in that? And so, if you look at kind of the economy and you look at government and you add a third part of the triangle to that, that's morality, so morality combined with, and when I mean morality, I mean like, is it acceptable to have a 70-hour work week? Is it acceptable to, to make people go into mines that are dangerous, and I've done, mine safety work, for example. So that's the kind of morality I'm talking about. But we really do create our own future based on what we want to see, how we want other people treated. And look, we can form our economics, we can form the policies around what we want the world to be. And I think one of the first things we need to do, though, is we need to get leaders, good leaders, honest leaders that have integrity into office without conflicts of interest. And I do want to point out to the audience that, one of the biggest issues that I see and that I'm going to really be fighting for is to ban all members of Congress from trading stocks. And that's just, there's so many conflicts of interest out there, and we could talk for a week about those, but that's a really good start. If we can stop members of Congress from trading stocks, they will make better decisions for their constituents and what I call optimized solutions. So any business leader knows that, you got to take conflicts of interest out of the management team. You need to align incentives. You need to be on the same page. And if we can do that with our leadership by taking conflicts of interest out of politics, you're going to see a golden age of America, and you're going to see everyone benefiting from that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, not to talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene again, which is a different race, but the idea that, just for the first time a couple of weeks ago, all of a sudden she became a daytime trader, I think speaks to volumes. And I think that is an issue that is so important for Democrats and Republicans, because it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. This is something that should bring all of us together, but it's something that, even Democrats continue to do in terms of trading. And I've been very outspoken on that. I love your comment about younger folks and sort of the correlation with the coal mine. I mean, it brings to mind today, in the last 24 hours, we've been hearing a lot about Republicans in Congress saying that they're going to support asbestos being around again. And it's just like, I mean, we've made so many inroads and move this country forward in so many ways, not just on issues like that, but again, on Juneteenth, and to see this stuff just going backwards is really frustrating. So I appreciate you mentioning what you did on that. I was going to ask you a question that I typically ask most candidates, which was, if you're elected, how you would ensure South Carolina is not just represented, but respected in the U.S. Senate. I'm going to pause on that because I think if you're elected, they will once again be respected in the U.S. Senate. So let's talk a little bit about your background. What life experiences, personal or professional, would you say have shaped your values and the kind of leader you want to be?
Yeah, so I would start off, it was just the family I was raised in, the community I was raised in. It was a little, agrarian community with, all our neighbors were farmers. The farm kids were getting up at 4:30 in the morning to milk the cows. It was a place where, we had, 4th of July picnics, where we would help each other. If someone's car broke down, we'd gather up the kids and go, help, fix whatever problem we had, rake the leaves of the woman who maybe was ill that day, the single widow, the widow who was ill. So that was really my foundation. As I got into a teenager, I got into Boy Scouts, got the Eagle Scout Award. Again, great life lessons there, just practical life lessons. And as I got older, as I went into school, a lot of service organizations, as I became a senior, helping freshmen, with their classes, with homework, with fundraisers. As an adult, I got into, fundraising for cancer drives and raising money for hospitals, and, belonged to the Kiwanis Club, and the Kiwanis Club is focused on, helping children all over the world. So, I've always had, I guess, outside of work, I've always had kind of a spirit and kind of a focus. My moral compass is really geared towards helping people. And actually, if you do look at the businesses that I've built over the years, they've been in things that have helped society, things like renewable energy, things like healthcare. One of the companies that I helped build is this healthcare company that does philanthropic matching that helps people get out of medical debt. And so, another company is, using analytics to help make better decisions for businesses so they can serve their customers better, so that the customers have a better experience. So my life is all about solving problems. It's all about making people's lives better. And at the end of the day, that's what politicians need to do. They just need to make people's lives better at the end of the day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And I'll probably use this next piece just to kind of push into an earlier question. But the other comment I just wanted to make for anyone tuning in is another race that happened just a number of years ago, but we shouldn't forget about, is shortly after Donald Trump was elected to his first term. There was a guy who at the time was seen as somebody who could have big aspirations or a big career at the national level. He was compared to Donald Trump as sort of like kind of like a mini Donald Trump, and his name was Matt Bevin. And along came Andy Beshear, who beat Matt Bevin in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, who Andy did that 24 hours after Matt Bevin had Donald Trump campaigning for GOTV in the state that night before. And obviously Andy went on and is aligned with you on the right side of history here on these issues to be reelected. So I just want to kind of throw that as another example of some of these states where, many are quick to write them off. But again, we just had Donald Trump reelected. Democrats are not questioning that he was reelected and ran for a second term and won. However, what you see is you do see in that sort of off year afterwards, in that 2 years, a lot of things can happen. So if you're watching, really please take a look at Lee Johnson, and we'll have his website at the end of this. I got two more quick questions for you. South Carolina has a rich history of movement building, from civil rights to labor organizing. How do you see yourself continuing that legacy as a candidate and one day as a senator?
Yeah, so definitely recognize, the giants that we have, all those that went before us, they were facing real danger. Their families were facing real danger, consequence of going to jail, the consequence of death, consequences of being shunned in parts of society. And we can't forget those people who, shoulders were frankly standing upon. And I want to continue that great tradition in South Carolina. I think that at the end of the day, South Carolina and all of America, we're fighting for something better. We're fighting for that perfect union. It goes back to the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the goal. That's the touchdown that we need to cross. And, but, right now, again, I'm not seeing that in this country. I'm seeing a lot of fear. I'm seeing, a lot of anxiety. Instead of seeing happiness, I'm seeing stress. I'm seeing depression. And the only way we're going to turn this around is by, and again, I've been talking to people, studying this. This has just been my passion. I'm so energized by it. But when it comes down to it, I think there's two things that really can turn this ship around. One is that we need to have those ethical leaders in. And what I mean by ethical, I mean those people that are truly making the right decisions for their constituents and not just for themselves. The second thing that we need is we need a society, a group of citizens that respect one another, that talk in a civilized way. You can't have a civilization without civility. And now we can, let's go into the forum, let's debate policies, let's fight on policies. But we do need to be respectful at the end of the day. We are the United States of America, not the divided states of America. But if we can do these two things, I'm hopeful, shooting for that touchdown of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that's the goal. And I think we can reach it.
Yeah. And that's such a good point. When you talk about just sort of who we are, I always talk about sort of neighbors, friends, family members. And, there's been a lot, obviously, not just going on in this country, but, that's been on display in the news, and a lot of conversations about the National Guard and other things like that. And I think people forget, watching this, the National Guard members are our neighbors. And so I think that sometimes it takes moments like this in history to sort of bring everyone together. When you're literally standing face to face sometimes out there with your neighbor, and these are folks that you all depend on. Whether it's what you talked about, a neighbor that's sick. We've got one across the street. When we first moved in here 2 years ago, the other neighbor came and gave us a heads up, like, hey, he's always going to try to cut his lawn, but we all make sure we cut it before he can, so he doesn't go out there to try to do it, because he's fallen a couple of times. And I think that's what makes us really such a great nation.
And Adam, if I could also just interject, also, we've all got these, great stories, and it's such the truth. And one thing that I realized while I was working with a large financial services company, we were doing work around, I think something like 42 countries, 42 countries around the world. And we had information on, fraud levels. And I can tell you that when you look at our country versus other countries, we're a very good country. We are, if you look at Russia's data or other countries' data, like we're just amazing. And I just want people to know, yeah, things look bad right now, but like we are good people at the end of the day. We are the last best hope, I think, for humanity and for humanity's legacy. So again, let's celebrate, the great people we are. But again, there's always we can always go upwards.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point too, especially what is still a relatively young experiment that is the United States of America. And that's something that we need to continue to protect the integrity of. I'll throw a softball out there. Finally, how can people watching, whether they're in South Carolina or across the country, support your campaign and help you take the fight directly to Lindsey Graham?
Yeah, let's take this fight directly to Lindsey. We need to retire Lindsey, and it's about time. Yeah, thank you. Would love for people to go to leejohnsonsc.com. That's FORSC.com. Would love to visit you, have you visit the website. Follow us on social media, share our posts. And if you have the ability, please chip in. We need to be competitive. We need to buy airtime. I think Lindsey's looking at somewhere between a $17 and $19 million war chest. So we need to be able to compete with that. So would love to visit leejohnsonforsc.com.
That's great. And we'll make sure that all of that is overlaid here and clickable so people can find everything. Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate you stepping up. Anything that any of us can do to be of help to you, but we'll make sure that, folks don't write this off. And, we've got that sort of 50-state strategy that Howard Dean and others talked about years ago.
I think that's a great strategy, and keep up the good fight, Adam.
Cool. Thank you so much, Lee. Appreciate it.
See ya.